The traffic stop happened at 11:42 p.m. on October 3, 2024, on DN1 Highway, just outside Ploiești, Romania. Commandant Vasile Cristescu of the Poliția Rutieră flipped on his blue lights behind a modest Dacia Logan traveling 68 kilometers per hour in a 70 zone. There was no traffic violation, there never was. This was about money, and the woman driving that car was about to become his 47th victim in 6 months. What Commandant Cristescu didn't know was that the woman behind the wheel, wearing jeans and a faded sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, was Judge Adriana Nicolescu of the Curtea de Apel București. For the past 3 weeks, she'd been driving the highways around Ploiești in borrowed civilian clothes and an unregistered vehicle, documenting a corruption scheme that had been bleeding Romanian drivers dry while making certain police commanders very rich. Adriana pulled onto the shoulder, her hands steady on the wheel despite her racing heart. She'd heard about this scheme from 14 different complainants in her courtroom over the past 4 months. Drivers stopped for phantom violations, threats of impounded vehicles and suspended licenses, demands for immediate cash payment to resolve the situation. Every complaint named the same stretch of highway. Every description matched the same commander. But without evidence that would stand up in court, the complaints had gone nowhere. Tonight, that was about to change. Commander Cristescu approached the driver's window with the confident swagger of a man who'd done this hundreds of times. He was 46 years old, 22 years with the Poliția Română, and he'd learned long ago that the badge could be worth more than the salary if you knew how to work the system. At 6,000 lei per month official pay, he'd been earning an additional $15,000 to 20,000 lei monthly through roadside shakedowns. In 6 months, he'd collected over 100,000 lei in illegal payments, all carefully structured to avoid the electronic payment systems that might leave traces for ANAF or DNA investigators. "Bună seara," Cristescu said, shining his flashlight directly into Adriana's eyes. "License and registration." Adriana handed over the documents with slightly trembling hands, playing the role of a nervous driver perfectly. The license showed her real name, but listed an address in a working-class neighborhood in Sectorul 4 București, rather than her actual residence in the diplomatic quarter. The registration was for a vehicle owned by her brother-in-law, borrowed specifically for this operation. Cristescu studied the documents with exaggerated scrutiny, then shook his head slowly. "Doamna Nicolescu, do you know why I stopped you?" "Nu, domnule. I wasn't speeding. My lights are working. I don't understand." "Your vehicle crossed the center line 3 times in the past 2 kilometers. That's reckless driving under Article 102 of the Traffic Code. Very serious offense." The lie came smoothly, practiced through hundreds of repetitions. "I'll need to impound your vehicle and suspend your license pending an investigation." Adriana's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. "But I didn't cross any line. I was driving carefully. This must be a mistake." Cristescu leaned closer to her window, his voice dropping to a confidential tone that carried an unmistakable threat. "Listen, Domna, I understand mistakes happen. You're probably tired. Maybe you had a drink earlier. These things can be complicated. The impound fee alone is 2,500 lei, plus towing, plus storage. Then there's the administrative hearing, lawyer fees, time off work. It could cost you 10,000 lei and take 3 months to resolve." He paused, letting the manufactured problem sink in. "Or we could handle this right now. A fine of 1,500 lei, paid immediately, and you drive away, no paperwork, no impound, no problems. What do you think?" The shakedown was textbook perfect. Create a serious but fictional violation, describe an expensive and time-consuming official process, then offer a cash settlement that seems like a bargain by comparison. Most drivers, faced with the choice between paying 1,500 lei now or risking 10,000 lei and months of bureaucratic nightmare, paid immediately. Adriana had heard this exact script, with minor variations, from 14 complainants. But hearing it firsthand, experiencing the manufactured urgency and barely veiled threats, made her blood run cold with rage. This wasn't just corruption. This was systematic extortion backed by the authority of the Romanian state. "I don't have that much cash with me," Adriana said quietly, maintaining her role. Maybe 800 lei in my purse." Cristescu's eyes narrowed. This was where it sometimes got complicated. Some drivers genuinely didn't carry cash. "There's a bankomat 2 kilometers back. We can follow you there. You withdraw the money. We settle this properly. Or I start the impound process right now. Please, Domnul, I can get the money. Don't impound my car. I need it for work tomorrow." "Smart choice, Domna. Follow me to the bankomat." What Commander Cristescu failed to notice in his confidence was the small device clipped to Adriana's sun visor, disguised as a GPS mount. The camera had been recording since the moment he approached her window, capturing every word, every gesture, every detail of the shakedown in high-definition video. Audio quality was perfect, backed up by a secondary recording device hidden in her jacket pocket. More importantly, what Cristescu couldn't see was the unmarked Dacia Duster parked 200 meters back on the shoulder, containing 2 DNA investigators and a technical specialist from the Serviciul de Telecomunicații Speciale. They'd been tracking Adriana's vehicle all evening through GPS, monitoring the situation, ready to intervene if things turned dangerous. Adriana drove slowly toward the ATM at her OMV petrol station, Commander Cristescu's patrol car following close behind, blue lights still flashing. The recorded evidence was already being transmitted wirelessly to the DNA team. By the time they reached the parking lot, prosecutors would have everything they needed for an arrest. The scheme Adriana was documenting had been operating for at least 18 months, though investigators suspected it went back much further. Commander Cristescu worked a specific stretch of DN1 Highway between Ploiești and Brașov, targeting drivers during late evening hours when traffic was light and witnesses were scarce. He focused on vehicles that looked modest, suggesting drivers without resources to fight back through lawyers or complaints to higher authorities. His method was simple but effective. He'd stop vehicles for fabricated violations, threaten severe consequences through official processes, then offer immediate cash settlements. The amounts ranged from 800 to 2,500 lei, depending on his assessment of what the driver could pay. He accepted only cash, never cards or bank transfers that might leave electronic traces. He provided no receipts, no documentation, nothing that could prove the payment had occurred. The genius of the scheme was its self-protecting nature. Victims who paid were unlikely to complain because they'd technically bribed a police officer, even if that bribe had been extorted through threats. Victims who refused to pay and had their vehicles impounded faced expensive bureaucratic processes that often cost more than the original shakedown demand. Either way, Cristescu won. What he hadn't counted on was a judge who'd spent 3 weeks analyzing the pattern, obtaining authorization from the Procurer General for an undercover operation, and personally volunteering to be the bait that would finally provide the irrefutable evidence needed for prosecution. Adriana pulled into the OMV station parking lot at 11:58 p.m. Commander Cristescu parked his patrol car beside her Dacia Logan, blocking her exit. The symbolism was clear. "You're trapped until I get my money. I'll be right back," Adriana said, walking toward the ATM with her bank card. Cristescu followed several steps behind, maintaining his role as the concerned officer, making sure the fine got paid properly. What neither of them saw was the unmarked Dacia Duster pulling into the station from the opposite entrance, 3 DNA operatives exiting quietly, moving into position around the parking lot. The trap was closing, but it had to play out completely. They needed footage of the actual money transfer, the moment when Cristescu would accept illegal payment in exchange for not pursuing the fabricated charges. Adriana inserted her card into the ATM, very aware of Cristescu standing 6 feet behind her, very aware of the DNA team moving into final positions, very aware that this moment would either expose systematic corruption or end with her in potential danger if something went wrong. She withdrew 1,500 lei in crisp 50 lei notes, turned around, extended the cash toward Commander Cristescu. "Here's the 1,500 lei. Now I can go." "Yes?" Cristescu took the money with practiced smoothness, folding it once and sliding it into his jacket pocket without counting it. "Smart decision, Domna. Drive carefully from now on. Pay attention to the road." "We're done here." The moment his hand left his pocket after securing the cash, 3 DNA investigators moved in from different directions, their badges displayed, their authority clear and absolute. Comandantul Vasile Cristescu, Direcția Națională Anticorupție. "You're under arrest for corrupție, extorcare, and abuse of office under Articles 289, 207, and 132 of the Codel Penal. Hands where we can see them." The color drained from Cristescu's face. His hand moved reflexively toward the 1,500 lei in his pocket, then froze as he realized how completely he'd been caught. His eyes darted around the parking lot, looking for escape or explanation, finding neither. Then he looked back at Adriana, and recognition dawned with the force of catastrophe. The nervous driver in jeans and a faded sweater wasn't nervous at all. She stood straighter now, her demeanor completely changed, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent 15 years on the bench, judging cases exactly like his. "Commander Cristescu, I'm Judge Adriana Nicolescu, Curtea de Apel București. For the past 3 weeks, I've been investigating complaints about systematic extortion on this highway. You just committed multiple felonies in front of recording devices and DNA witnesses. Every word you said, every threat you made, every lei you demanded was documented. You're finished." Cristescu's legs nearly gave out. A judge. He'd just extorted a sitting judge of the Curtea de Apel. The realization was so catastrophic that for several seconds he couldn't process it. His career wasn't just over. His life as he knew it was over. The DNA team moved efficiently, placing cartouche on Cristescu's wrists, reading his rights under Romanian law, securing the 1,500 lei as evidence. The technical specialist retrieved the recording devices from Adriana's vehicle, ensuring all footage was properly preserved. Within 10 minutes, Commander Cristescu was in the back of the unmarked Duster, being transported to DNA headquarters in Bucharest for processing. But the arrest was only the beginning. The DNA team had been investigating the broader corruption network for 6 weeks, ever since Judge Nicolescu had brought the pattern of complaints to the Procurer General's attention. What had started as one corrupt commander on one stretch of highway had revealed a much larger conspiracy. Analysis of Cristescu's financial records, obtained through ANAF cooperation, showed deposits totaling 127,000 lei over the past 18 months that couldn't be explained by his official salary. He'd been careful, structuring the deposits to stay below reporting thresholds, but the pattern was clear. His spending had also increased dramatically during that period. A renovated apartment in Ploiești, a new BMW X3, luxury vacations to Greece and Turkey that his official income couldn't possibly support. More disturbing was what the financial investigation had revealed about connections to other officers. Cristescu's deposits were structured similarly to those of 4 other Poliția Rutieră commanders working different sections of DN1, DN2, and A1 highways. The amounts varied, but the pattern was identical. Unexplained cash income, structured deposits, suddenly improved lifestyles. DNA investigators suspected a coordinated scheme involving at least 5 commanders, possibly more. They weren't working together directly, but they were using the same methods, suggesting either shared training or guidance from someone higher up in the Policia Romana hierarchy. The investigation had expanded to include the regional commander responsible for traffic enforcement across Prahova County. Judge Nicolescu had volunteered for the undercover operation after becoming frustrated with the inability to prosecute based on victim complaints alone. Drivers would describe the shakedowns, but without physical evidence or witnesses, it became a case of their word against a police commander's. Defense lawyers would argue that the victims were lying to avoid legitimate traffic fines. Judges had to dismiss cases for lack of evidence, but with video and audio recordings of the actual extortion, with DNA witnesses observing the transaction, with the illegal payment physically recovered from Cristescu's pocket, the case became prosecution-proof. No defense attorney could argue away a video recording of their client explicitly demanding cash in exchange for not pursuing fabricated charges. The operation at the OMV station ended at 12:17 a.m. on October 4, 2024. By 1:30 a.m., Commander Cristescu was being processed at DNA headquarters, his uniform replaced by detention clothing, his badge and weapon confiscated, his career destroyed. By 3 a.m., prosecutors were drafting arrest warrants for the 4 other suspected commanders, planning simultaneous raids that would prevent anyone from destroying evidence or fleeing. Judge Adriana Nicolescu arrived home at 2:15 a.m., still wearing the jeans and faded sweater that had been her disguise. Her husband, also a judge at the Curtea de Apel, had stayed awake waiting for her return, knowing the operation was happening but not knowing the details until it concluded. "Este gata?" he asked when she walked through the door. "Da. We got everything. The recording is perfect. He's under arrest. It's over." But it wasn't over. It was just beginning. The arrest of one corrupt commander would cascade into an investigation that would expose systematic corruption within the Poliția Rutieră, implicate senior officials who'd either participated or deliberately ignored the pattern, and force reforms in how traffic enforcement operated across Romania. The video recording from Judge Nicolescu's undercover operation would be played in courtrooms, featured in media reports, and used in police training as an example of how not to dishonor the badge. Commander Vasile Cristescu's face would become infamous across Romania as the corrupt officer who got caught extorting a judge. But that morning, as the sun rose over Bucharest and news of the arrest began circulating through law enforcement channels, the full implications were still unknown. All anyone knew was that a routine traffic stop on DN1 Highway had ended with a commander in cartouche and a judge stepping out of her undercover role to deliver justice personally. The story would become legendary in Romanian legal circles. The judge who went undercover to catch corrupt cops, who put herself at risk to protect ordinary citizens, who refused to let systematic corruption continue just because it was difficult to prosecute. It would inspire other judges to be more aggressive in pursuing official misconduct. It would terrify corrupt officers who'd assumed their positions made them untouchable, and it would prove, once again, that in modern Romania, no one was above the law, not even those sworn to enforce it. The interrogation room at DNA headquarters was deliberately austere. White walls, fluorescent lighting, a metal table bolted to the floor, and 2 chairs. Commander Vasile Cristescu sat in one chair at 4:17 a.m. on October 4, 2024, still wearing the detention clothing he'd been given when his uniform was confiscated. Across from him sat senior prosecutor Elena Barbu, who'd been with the DNA for 12 years and specialized in police corruption cases. "Let's be very clear about your situation," Barbu began, opening a laptop and turning it so Cristescu could see the screen. "This is footage from Judge Nicolescu's vehicle, recorded tonight at 11:47 p.m. The video played with devastating clarity. Cristescu's voice, threatening vehicle impoundment and license suspension, his demand for 1,500 lei, his acceptance of the cash, his casual reassurance that everything was resolved now that money had changed hands. Every word, every gesture, captured in high definition with perfect audio. That's corruptia under Article 289, extorcare under Article 207, and abuse of office under Article 132, Babu continued. Each charge carries 5 to 12 years. But we both know tonight wasn't your first time. The DNA has been investigating you for 6 weeks. She pulled out a second folder, thick with bank statements. These are your deposits over the past 18 months. Your official salary is 6,000 lei monthly. That's 72,000 lei annually. Yet you've deposited 127,000 lei in cash during that period. The mathematics don't work, Commander. Cristescu's lawyer, a hastily hired attorney named Radu Popescu, who'd arrived at 3:30 a.m., leaned forward. My client exercises his right to remain silent under Article 83 of the Codul de Procedură Penală. That's his right, Babu agreed. But he should understand what silence means in this situation. We have video evidence of tonight's crime. We have financial evidence of unexplained income. We have 14 victim complaints dating back 18 months, all describing the same method on the same highway. We have enough for conviction without his cooperation. She paused, letting that sink in. However, Commander Cristescu isn't working alone. We know about the other commanders using identical methods on DN2 and A1 highways. We know about the coordination. We know someone higher up in the Poliția Română structure either organized this scheme or deliberately ignored it. If your client wants any consideration at sentencing, now is the time to cooperate. The offer was clear. Testify against the bigger fish, provide evidence against other corrupt officers, and the DNA might recommend reduced charges or concurrent sentences. Refuse and face maximum penalties for every count. Cristescu looked at his lawyer, his face a mixture of fear and calculation. In the 3 hours since his arrest, he'd been processing the catastrophe. His career was destroyed. His freedom was gone. His family would be humiliated. The question now was how much prison time he'd serve and whether he could salvage anything by cooperating. I want immunity, Cristescu said quietly. No immunity, Babu replied immediately. You're guilty of multiple felonies. But full cooperation means we recommend 8 years instead of 12, concurrent instead of consecutive, possibility of early release. You serve 6 years at most instead of 15. That's the deal. Cristescu looked at his lawyer again. Popescu nodded slightly. The deal was reasonable, given the overwhelming evidence. Fight, and he'd die in prison. Cooperate, and he might see freedom before 60. There are 4 others, Cristescu began, his voice barely above a whisper. Commander Mihai Dumitrescu on DN2 between Bucharest and Constanța. Commander Ion Popa on A1 near Pitești. Commander Andrei Stoica on DN1 north toward Brașov. Commander Gabriel Ionescu on DN7 toward Timișoara. We don't work together directly, but we all report to Regional Commander Nicolae Barbu in Prahova County. The name made Barbu's pen stop moving. Nicolae Barbu was a decorated officer with 28 years in the Poliția Română, responsible for overseeing traffic enforcement across 6 counties. If he was involved, this went much higher than anyone had suspected. Tell me about Commander Barbu's involvement. 6 months ago, he called a meeting at the regional headquarters in Ploiești. 5 of us commanders were there. He said the Poliția Rutieră was underfunded, our salaries were too low, and no one in Bucharest cared about highway officers working night shifts. Then he said some officers had found ways to supplement their income through traffic enforcement, and as long as it was done carefully and didn't create media problems, he wouldn't look too closely. Cristescu's hands were shaking now, realizing he was implicating a superior officer. He didn't explicitly tell us to extort drivers, But he made it clear he knew it was happening and wouldn't interfere. He even gave us advice about avoiding electronic payments and structuring cash deposits below ANAF reporting thresholds. This was bigger than 5 corrupt commanders. This was systematic corruption, enabled by a regional commander who'd essentially given his subordinates permission to run shakedown operations as long as they didn't embarrass the organization. I need names, dates, locations of meetings, and any written communications, Babu said. Everything you can remember about Babu's involvement and the other commanders' operations. The interrogation continued until 7:30 a.m., with Cristescu providing detailed information about the corruption network. By 8 a.m., DNA prosecutors were drafting arrest warrants for 4 additional commanders and regional commander Nicolae Babu. By 9 a.m., Judge Adriana Nicolescu, despite having been awake all night, was in her chambers at the Curtea de Apel, reviewing the warrants and authorizing simultaneous raids. The arrests began at 11 a.m. on October 4, 2024. DNA teams, accompanied by Poliția Rutieră officers from units outside the corrupted structure, executed warrants across 4 different locations simultaneously. The operation was coordinated to prevent any commander from warning the others once arrests began. Commander Mihai Dumitrescu was arrested at his home in Constanța, still in pajamas, when DNA investigators knocked on his door at 11:03 a.m. His wife watched in shock as cartouches were placed on his wrists and he was led to an unmarked vehicle. Neighbors recorded the arrest on mobile phones, and by noon, footage was circulating on social media. Commander Ion Popa was arrested at a cafe in Pitești, where he was having coffee with colleagues. The arrest was public and humiliating, exactly as DNA prosecutors intended. They wanted corrupt officers to understand that badge and rank provided no protection against prosecution. Commander Andrei Stoica was arrested at Poliția Rutieră headquarters in Brașov, handcuffed in front of subordinates who'd worked under him for years. The symbolism was powerful. Corruption would be exposed wherever it existed, even inside police facilities. Commander Gabriel Ionescu attempted to flee when DNA investigators arrived at his location near Timișoara. He'd received a warning call from someone who'd seen Dumitrescu's arrest on social media. He made it 3 kilometers before being stopped by a police roadblock. Fleeing added additional charges to his case. The most significant arrest was Regional Commander Nicolae Babu. At 11:47 a.m., DNA investigators entered his office at the Prahova County headquarters, served the warrant, and arrested him in front of his staff. Babu was 53 years old, a decorated officer who'd received commendations for his service. Now he was being arrested for enabling systematic corruption across 6 counties. The media explosion was immediate. By 1 p.m., Digi24, Pro TV, and Antenna 3 were broadcasting breaking news about the coordinated arrests. The story was sensational. A judge had gone undercover to expose highway extortion, leading to the arrest of 5 commanders and a regional commander. Video clips from Judge Nicolescu's undercover operation were released to media with her permission, showing Commander Cristescu's shakedown attempt in devastating detail. The public reaction was a mixture of shock, anger, and satisfaction. Romanians had suspected for years that some traffic police were corrupt, but seeing video evidence of a commander explicitly demanding bribes was different. Social media exploded with Dreptate Vinge and Judge Nicolescu trending nationally. People shared their own stories of suspicious traffic stops and questionable fines. Political response was swift. The Minister of Internal Affairs, under whose authority the Poliția Română operated, held a press conference at 3 p.m. The actions of these officers betray everything the Romanian police should represent. They will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We are implementing immediate reforms to prevent similar corruption. The reforms were announced the following day. All traffic stops would now require dashboard camera recordings maintained for 90 days. All fines exceeding 500 lei would require supervisor approval. A dedicated hotline would be established for reporting suspected corruption, operated independently of local police structures. Officers found guilty of extortion would face mandatory minimum sentences with no possibility of plea bargaining below 8 years. But while politicians promised reforms, the DNA investigation was expanding in directions that revealed just how deep the corruption ran. Financial analysis of the 6 arrested officers showed they'd collectively deposited over 680,000 lei in unexplained cash over 18 months. That suggested hundreds of victims, possibly more than 1,000 drivers who'd been extorted. The DNA established a victim hotline within 24 hours of the arrests, encouraging anyone who'd been stopped and pressured to pay cash fines on DN1, DN2, DN7, or A1 highways to come forward. The response was overwhelming. By October 7th, 3 days after the arrests, over 300 people had called with detailed accounts of being shaken down. Each story followed the same pattern: late-night traffic stop for a fabricated violation, threats of vehicle impoundment and expensive bureaucratic processes, offer of immediate cash settlement. The amounts ranged from 800 to 3,000 lei, depending on the driver's apparent ability to pay. Most victims had paid rather than risk the threatened consequences. What made the scheme particularly insidious was how it exploited people's fear of government bureaucracy. Many victims were working-class Romanians who couldn't afford lawyers or time off work for administrative hearings. Paying 1,500 lei to a corrupt commander seemed preferable to fighting the system, even though they knew they'd done nothing wrong. Judge Nicolescu gave her first interview to Pro TV on October 6th, explaining why she'd taken the unprecedented step of going undercover. As a judge, I was seeing complaint after complaint about highway extortion, but we couldn't prosecute without evidence. Victims were afraid to testify. Defense lawyers would claim the drivers were lying. Cases were dismissed. I realized the only way to stop this was to provide irrefutable evidence, and that meant experiencing the corruption firsthand. The interview made her a national figure overnight. Legal experts debated whether judges should conduct undercover operations, but public opinion was overwhelmingly supportive. Judge Nicolescu had done what many officials only talked about. She'd taken personal risk to protect ordinary citizens from corrupt officials. The arraignments began on October 8th, 2024. All 6 defendants appeared before Judge Cristina Popescu at the Curtea de Apel București. The proceedings were broadcast live on television, unprecedented for criminal cases, but authorized due to the public interest. Prosecutor Elena Barbu argued for remand without bail for all defendants. These men systematically abused their positions as police officers to extort Romanian citizens. They collected hundreds of thousands of lei through threats and intimidation. They represent a danger to public safety and a risk of evidence tampering. Defense attorneys argued for bail, citing the defendants' lack of prior criminal records and their service to Romania. But Judge Popescu was unmoved. The evidence suggests a long-term criminal conspiracy involving multiple officers and enabling by a superior. The defendants will be remanded to custody pending trial. All 6 were sent to Penitenciarul Rahova to await trial. The sight of 6 police commanders being led away in cartouche was broadcast nationally, a powerful message that corruption had consequences regardless of rank or position. The investigation continued expanding. DNA prosecutors discovered that Regional Commander Barbu had received cash gifts totaling 47,000 lei from his subordinate commanders over the 18-month period. The payments were disguised as contributions to his daughter's wedding and his father's medical expenses, but the timing correlated perfectly with increases in the subordinates' extortion activities. More disturbing was evidence suggesting Babu had actively protected the corrupt commanders from scrutiny. When Internal Affairs had opened an investigation into Commander Cristescu after a victim complaint in March 2024, Babu had personally intervened to have the investigation closed, claiming it was based on unfounded allegations by a disgruntled driver. By mid-October 2024, the DNA had assembled a case that would likely result in convictions on over 200 individual counts of extortion, corruption, and abuse of office. The financial evidence alone was devastating. The video evidence from Judge Nicolescu's operation was irrefutable. Victim testimony from 300 complainants would overwhelm any defense strategy. Defense attorneys began negotiating plea agreements. Commander Cristescu, who'd cooperated immediately, received the deal promised: 8 years, possibility of early release after 6. Commanders Dumitrescu, Popa, and Stoica negotiated similar agreements in exchange for testimony against Regional Commander Babu. Commander Ionescu, who'd attempted to flee, received 10 years with no early release possibility. The biggest trial would be Regional Commander Nicolae Babu's. He refused to plead guilty, insisting he'd done nothing wrong. His defense would argue that he'd merely been aware of rumors but had no direct evidence of subordinates' crimes. The trial was scheduled for January 2025, and it would become one of the most watched criminal proceedings in recent Romanian history. Judge Adriana Nicolescu would testify, describing not just her undercover operation, but the pattern of complaints that had led to the investigation. Her testimony would be crucial in establishing that Babu had been informed of the corruption, but had chosen to ignore it, making him complicit under Romanian law. But as October 2024 drew to a close, the immediate results were clear. 6 corrupt officers were in prison awaiting trial. Hundreds of victims were being contacted for restitution proceedings. The Poliția Rutieră was implementing reforms that would make similar schemes much harder to execute. And Judge Nicolescu had proven that Romanian justice system could hold its own officers accountable. The commander who'd thought he was shaking down a helpless citizen had instead encountered a judge willing to risk her safety to expose corruption. That miscalculation had destroyed his career and exposed a conspiracy that had been bleeding Romanian drivers for at least 18 months. The case would become legendary in Romanian legal history. The judge who went undercover, the commanders who got caught, and the systematic corruption that was finally brought to justice through courage, careful investigation, and irrefutable evidence. January 15th, 2025. The courtroom at Curtea de Apel București was filled beyond capacity 3 hours before the trial was scheduled to begin. Regional Commander Nicolae Babu's case had become the most anticipated criminal proceeding in Romania in years. Media from across Europe had requested access. The trial would be broadcast live on multiple channels, a rare decision justified by the extraordinary public interest in seeing how the justice system handled corruption at the highest levels of law enforcement. Judge Mircea Davidescu presided, a 30-year veteran of the Romanian judiciary, known for running tight courtrooms and showing no favoritism regardless of a defendant's position or connections. At 9 a.m. precisely, he called the court to order and addressed the packed gallery. This trial concerns serious allegations of corruption, conspiracy, and abuse of office by a senior police commander. The proceedings will be conducted with the dignity and fairness that Romanian law demands. I will tolerate no disruptions. Nicolae Babu sat at the defense table beside his attorney, Corneliu Munteanu, one of Bucharest's most expensive criminal defense lawyers. At 53, Babu still carried himself with the military bearing of a career police officer, But the past 3 months in Penitenciarul Rahova had taken their toll. His uniform had been replaced by a civilian suit, his badge confiscated, his authority stripped away. Lead prosecutor Elena Barbu from the DNA stood to present the state's case. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Regional Commander Barbu not only knew about systematic extortion being conducted by his subordinate commanders, but actively enabled and profited from their criminal activities. He provided them with guidance on avoiding detection, protected them from internal investigations, and received cash payments totaling 47,000 lei disguised as gifts. He turned his region into a criminal enterprise disguised as law enforcement. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They presented financial records showing the unexplained deposits made by the 5 subordinate commanders, totaling 680,000 lei over 18 months. They demonstrated how all 5 had used identical methods, suggesting coordination or shared instruction. They showed how victim complaints had been systematically dismissed or buried when they reached Barbu's office. Then came the video evidence from Judge Nicolescu's undercover operation. The courtroom fell silent as Commander Cristescu's voice filled the room, threatening vehicle impoundment, demanding 1,500 lei in cash, accepting the illegal payment. The footage was played in its entirety, 37 minutes of irrefutable documentation of corruption. This is what was happening under Regional Commander Barbu's authority. Prosecutor Barbu said, not once, not twice, hundreds of times. And when victims complained, when Internal Affairs tried to investigate, the regional commander intervened to protect his subordinates. The victim testimony began on day 2 of the trial. Over 40 drivers took the stand, describing their experiences with highway extortion. Their stories were remarkably consistent. Late-night stops for fabricated violations, threats of expensive bureaucratic processes, demands for immediate cash payment. The amounts varied, but the script was always the same. Maria Popescu, a nurse from Ploiești, described being stopped by Commander Cristescu in August 2024 while driving home from a night shift. He said, I crossed the center line, which I didn't. He said my vehicle would be impounded unless I paid 1,200 lei immediately. I had just worked a 12-hour shift. I was exhausted. I paid because I couldn't afford to lose my car. Ion Marinescu, a truck driver, testified about being stopped by Commander Dumitrescu on DN2. He claimed my cargo was improperly secured. It wasn't. I've been driving trucks for 20 years. But he said the fine was 2,500 lei, and if I didn't pay immediately, my cargo would be confiscated and I'd lose my delivery contract. I paid. What choice did I have? The testimonies continued for 3 days, each one reinforcing the pattern of systematic extortion. Many victims had been too afraid to complain initially, worried that police officers would retaliate. Only after the arrests and the establishment of the DNA victim hotline had they felt safe coming forward. Then came the testimony from the subordinate commanders who'd accepted plea agreements. Commander Vasile Cristescu took the stand on day 5, his prison uniform a stark reminder of his fall from authority. Defense attorney Munteanu objected to his testimony, arguing it was coerced through the plea agreement, but Judge Davidescu overruled the objection. Commander Cristescu described the meeting in April 2024 at Regional Commander Barbu's office. Prosecutor Barbu asked. There were 5 of us commanders there, Cristescu testified, his voice steady despite the obvious discomfort. Regional Commander Barbu said he'd been reviewing our unit's performance. He knew our revenue from legitimate fines had decreased, but he'd noticed that several of us had improved our personal financial situations. He said he understood that highway officers had to be creative about supplementing their income. Did he explicitly tell you to extort drivers? Not in those exact words. But he made it very clear he knew what we were doing and wouldn't interfere as long as we were careful. He gave us specific advice about avoiding electronic payments and structuring cash deposits below reporting thresholds. What happened when a victim filed a complaint about your conduct in March 2024? Internal Affairs opened an investigation. I was worried, but Regional Commander Babu called me into his office and told me not to worry. He said he'd handle it. The investigation was closed within a week with a finding of unfounded allegations. Commander Mihai Dumitrescu provided similar testimony, describing how Babu had created an environment where subordinates understood corruption was acceptable as long as it didn't create publicity problems. Commander Ion Popa testified about the cash payments they'd made to Babu, disguised as contributions to family events, but clearly understood as kickbacks for his protection. The defense's case began on day 8. Attorney Munteanu argued that Regional Commander Babu had been a dedicated officer for 28 years, with commendations and decorations for his service. He claimed that Babu had been unaware of the specific crimes his subordinates were committing, and that the subordinates' testimony was unreliable because they were trying to reduce their own sentences by implicating their superior. These are convicted criminals trying to deflect blame, Munteanu argued. They're claiming my client knew about their activities, but where's the proof? Where are the written communications, the recorded conversations? This is speculation and self-serving testimony from corrupt officers trying to drag their commander down with them. But the defense strategy collapsed when Prosecutor Babu presented evidence seized from Regional Commander Babu's office computer. IT specialists had recovered deleted emails showing that Babu had received multiple complaints about suspicious traffic stops in his region. Rather than investigating, he'd filed the complaints away and never followed up. More damaging were text messages between Babu and Commander Cristescu, recovered from Cristescu's phone. In one exchange from June 2024, Cristescu had texted, "Another complaint came in about my sector. Nervous." Babu had responded, "Don't worry, I'll handle it like last time. Just be more careful about selecting targets." The text messages were devastating. They proved Babu wasn't merely negligent or unaware. He was actively protecting corrupt subordinates because he was profiting from their crimes. Judge Adriana Nicolescu testified on day 9. She described the pattern of complaints she'd seen in her courtroom, the frustration of being unable to prosecute without evidence, and the decision to conduct an undercover operation. "I took an oath to uphold Romanian law," she said from the witness stand. "That oath doesn't end when I leave the courtroom. When I saw systematic corruption that was immune to prosecution because of lack of evidence, I felt obligated to act. The undercover operation was the only way to obtain irrefutable proof." Defense attorney Munteanu tried to discredit her testimony by suggesting the operation was legally questionable. "Isn't it true that judges aren't trained for undercover operations, that you put yourself and others at risk?" "I coordinated with the DNA every step of the way," Judge Nicolescu responded calmly. "The operation was authorized by the Procurer General. DNA investigators were present for safety. Everything was done according to legal protocols, and the result was evidence that couldn't be disputed. Video footage of a commander explicitly extorting a citizen." Munteanu pressed harder. "But doesn't this set a dangerous precedent? Judges conducting their own investigations." "What's dangerous?" Judge Nicolescu replied, her voice carrying the weight of moral certainty, "is allowing corrupt police officers to prey on Romanian citizens without accountability. What's dangerous is a system where victims are too afraid to complain because they know complaints will be buried. I didn't act as a judge conducting an investigation. I acted as a citizen documenting a crime, with the same rights any Romanian has to record interactions with police." The testimony earned spontaneous applause from the gallery, which Judge Davidescu gavelled down immediately. But the impact was clear. Judge Nicolescu had become a symbol of judicial integrity and courage that transcended the specific case. The trial concluded on January 28, 2025, after 13 days of testimony. Closing arguments took an entire day, with Prosecutor Barbu methodically reviewing the overwhelming evidence: financial records, victim testimony, subordinates, accounts, text messages, and emails. The defense wants you to believe this was all happening without Regional Commander Barbu's knowledge, she concluded. But the evidence shows he knew, he protected, he profited, and he actively prevented investigation. He took an oath to serve and protect Romanian citizens. Instead, he oversaw a criminal enterprise that stole hundreds of thousands of lei from the people he was supposed to protect. That betrayal deserves the maximum sentence under Romanian law. Defense attorney Munteanu argued that Barbu was being scapegoated for his subordinates' crimes and that his service record showed he was fundamentally a good officer who'd made errors in judgment but hadn't committed crimes. The argument rang hollow against the mountain of evidence. Judge Davidescu announced he would render verdict on February 3, 2025, giving himself 5 days to review evidence and prepare written findings. Those 5 days saw intense media speculation about the outcome. Legal experts debated whether Barbu would be convicted on all counts or whether the defense had created enough doubt on some charges. February 3, 2025. The courtroom was again packed beyond capacity. Judge Davidescu entered at 10:00 a.m. and began reading his verdict without preamble. The court has reviewed 13 days of testimony and thousands of pages of documentary evidence. The findings are clear and compelling. Regional Commander Nicolae Barbu not only knew about systematic extortion being conducted by his subordinate commanders, but actively enabled their criminal activities through protection, guidance, and willful blindness to complaints. He reviewed the evidence methodically, explaining how each piece supported conviction. The financial records proved unexplained income. The victim testimony proved systematic extortion. The subordinates' accounts proved Barbu's knowledge and complicity. The text messages proved active protection of corrupt activities. On the charge of corruption under Article 289, the court finds the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy under Article 323, guilty. On abuse of office under Article 132, guilty. On receiving illegal benefits under Article 255, guilty. Barbu's face remained impassive, but his hands gripped the edge of the defense table hard enough that his knuckles turned white. The sentence is 15 years imprisonment at Penitenciarul Rahova, forfeiture of all assets connected to illegal income totaling 47,000 lei, permanent prohibition from holding any position of public trust in Romania, and restitution to victims to be determined by subsequent proceedings. The gavel fell. Nicolae Barbu's career, reputation, and freedom were destroyed. The regional commander who'd overseen a criminal enterprise while wearing the uniform of the Poliția Română would spend the next decade and a half in prison. The conviction and sentence sent shockwaves through Romanian law enforcement. If a regional commander with 28 years of service and multiple commendations could be convicted and receive 15 years, no one was untouchable. The message was clear. Corruption would be prosecuted regardless of rank, connections, or service record. The reforms that had been announced in October 2024 were fully implemented by March 2025. Every Poliția Rutieră vehicle was equipped with dashboard cameras that recorded continuously during traffic stops. The footage was uploaded automatically to secure servers and maintained for 90 days. Officers couldn't delete or manipulate the recordings. A new oversight unit was established within the Ministerul Administrației și Internelor, independent of local police command structures. The unit had authority to investigate any complaint of police corruption and reported directly to the minister. Victims could file complaints through a dedicated website or hotline, with guaranteed anonymity. Mandatory sentence minimums were implemented for police officers convicted of extortion. 8 years minimum, no possibility of reduction through plea bargaining below that threshold. The goal was deterrence. Make corruption so risky that officers would think twice before abusing their authority. The victim restitution process continued throughout 2025. DNA prosecutors identified 412 confirmed victims of the highway extortion scheme. The total amount stolen was calculated at $734,000. Babu's assets, his apartment in Ploiești, his vehicle, his bank accounts, were liquidated to contribute to restitution. The 5 subordinate commanders' assets were similarly seized. Judge Adriana Nicolescu received Romania's highest civilian honor for courage in May 2025, presented by the President in a ceremony at Palatul Cotroceni. Judge Nicolescu represents the best of Romanian justice, the President said. She risked her safety to protect her fellow citizens from corrupt officials. She proved that courage and integrity can overcome systematic corruption. The award ceremony was broadcast nationally, and Judge Nicolescu's speech became one of the most quoted in recent Romanian history. I'm honored by this recognition, but I was simply doing what any judge should do, ensuring that justice applies equally to everyone, including those who wear badges. Romania has made tremendous progress since 1989, but we still face challenges with corruption. The solution isn't complicated. It's prosecutors willing to investigate, judges willing to hold officials accountable, and citizens willing to come forward when they witness misconduct. By the end of 2025, the impact of the case was evident throughout Romanian law enforcement. Victim complaints about suspicious traffic stops had decreased by 73%. Internal affairs investigations of police corruption had increased by 41%, suggesting that officers were more willing to report misconduct by colleagues. Public trust in the Poliția Rutieră, which had been declining for years, showed improvement for the first time since measurements began. The 5 subordinate commanders were scattered across Romanian penitentiare, serving sentences ranging from 8 to 10 years. Comandantul Vasile Cristescu, who'd cooperated early and extensively, would be eligible for early release in 2030. The others would serve longer terms. All had lost their pensions, their reputations, and their freedom. Regional Commander Nicolae Barbu remained in penitentiarul Rahova, inmate 94728R, participating in mandatory rehabilitation programs designed to build the integrity he'd lacked during his career. His earliest possible release would be in 2040, when he'd be 68 years old. His family had disowned him. His former colleagues refused to speak his name. He'd become a cautionary tale told in police academies. This is what happens when you betray your oath. Judge Adriana Nicolescu returned to her chambers at Curtea de Apel București, hearing cases, rendering verdicts, and maintaining the judicial integrity that had made her willing to go undercover in the first place. She still drove DN1 Highway occasionally, but now without fear. The corruption that had plagued that stretch of road was gone, destroyed by her courage and the DNA's thorough prosecution. On October 3, 2026, exactly 2 years after the traffic stop that had started everything, a memorial was unveiled at the OMV station where Commander Cristescu had been arrested. The plaque read, "On this site, October 3, 2024, systematic police corruption was exposed through the courage of Judge Adriana Nicolescu and the work of the DNA. Justice prevailed." The ceremony was attended by dozens of victims who testified during the trial, DNA prosecutors who'd built the case, and police officers who wanted to demonstrate that most officers served with honor. Judge Nicolescu spoke briefly, emphasizing that the memorial wasn't about her, but about Romania's commitment to fighting corruption. 2 years ago, this parking lot was where a corrupt commander thought he was conducting routine extortion. Instead, it became the place where systematic corruption met accountability. That's what makes me proud of Romania, not that we're perfect, but that when corruption is exposed, we prosecute it regardless of who's involved. The story became part of Romanian legal education, taught in every law school and police academy. The case of Judge Nicolescu and the corrupt commanders demonstrated that courage, careful investigation, and irrefutable evidence could overcome even systematic corruption protected by senior officials. Comandantul Vasile Cristescu, serving his sentence in penitenciarul Gilava, was required to write an annual reflection on his crimes as part of his rehabilitation program. His 2026 submission was read to a victim impact panel. I wore the uniform of the Poliția Rutieră and believed it gave me power to do whatever I wanted. I learned that it gave me responsibility to serve honorably. I stopped Judge Nicolescu, thinking she was powerless. She proved that justice is more powerful than any badge, any rank, any corrupt scheme. I destroyed my life by betraying my oath. I deserve every day of this sentence. Regional Commander Nicolae Barbu never showed such remorse. He maintained throughout his incarceration that he'd been unfairly convicted, that his subordinates had lied about his involvement, that he was a scapegoat. His appeals were denied, his sentence stood. His delusions of innocence meant nothing against the overwhelming evidence. As 2027 approached, the reforms implemented after the highway extortion scandal had become permanent features of Romanian law enforcement. The dashboard camera system had expanded nationwide. The Independent Oversight Unit had investigated and prosecuted dozens of additional corruption cases. The mandatory minimums had deterred would-be corrupt officers from risking their careers for illegal payments. Most importantly, citizens had learned they could fight back against corruption. The victim hotline received thousands of calls annually, many resulting in investigations. Police officers knew they were being watched, recorded, and held accountable. The culture was changing, slowly but unmistakably. Judge Adriana Nicolescu continued her work at Curtea de Apel București, hearing cases and rendering justice. She'd gone undercover once and would never need to do it again. The video from that October night in 2024 had accomplished everything she'd hoped, exposing systematic corruption, leading to prosecutions, and creating reforms that protected Romanian citizens. The traffic stop at 11:42 p.m. on October 3, 2024, lasted 37 minutes from first lights to arrest. In those 37 minutes, a corrupt commander's scheme collapsed, a criminal conspiracy was exposed, and Romanian justice proved that no badge provided immunity from accountability. Commander Cristescu had thought he was shaking down a helpless citizen. Instead, he'd encountered a judge who'd spent 3 weeks preparing for exactly that moment. His miscalculation destroyed not just his career, but an entire network of corruption that had operated for 18 months. The lesson resonated across Romania. Abuse power at your peril, because eventually accountability arrives. Sometimes it arrives wearing jeans and a faded sweater, driving a borrowed Dacia Logan, carrying hidden cameras and the absolute determination to ensure that justice prevails. Întotdeauna, always.